to AIDA's first panel of the morning on the topic of jurisdictional and project approaches. Very much looking forward to it, and thanks for coming. I'll let my panelists introduce themselves in a minute, but I thought I should talk about a paper that AIDA released last week, which is on the very topic that we're going to cover today. So I'm Ellen. I'm the Director of Natural Climate Solutions and Aviation at AIDA. And yeah, really looking forward to speaking about this topic. The paper that we released last week, as I said, was very much based on this topic and actually shares the name of the session. And it was really based on member sort of views and input on this topic. And some of the key messages and sort of the reason behind writing this paper was that we wanted to sort of move beyond the debate that we've been seeing, at least historically, in the market around sort of whether it's, are we shifting to a jurisdictional approach, or, people who are really sort of maybe pro-project and seeing this kind of divide a little bit and this sort of either-or dichotomy. And so we thought, well, I think as AIDA, we can really sort of lead the charge a little bit on this topic and, hopefully get some consensus around the topic with our members who are very deeply engaged, as you'll hear, in this topic as well. So we wanted to write something that sort of allowed people to understand better how to engage in the market today, given this sort of evolving landscape, right, of, seeing a lot of initiatives and guidance pointing towards this shift towards jurisdictional approaches, but the reality in the market today is there are still lots of project-based credits. So what do you do with that information, right, and how do you engage constructively? So I think, and that was one of the sort of takeaways of the paper. Project and jurisdictional approaches will continue to exist in the market, at least in the near to medium term. So what does that mean for people who are trying to engage? In the paper itself, we tried to capture some of the most sort of up-to-date market data to help people understand exactly what's happening on the ground. So what are the existing jurisdictional approaches and programs that are active in the market today? And then sort of what's happening on the project-based side as well. And then I think what we were really trying to add to the conversation, I guess, is sort of, as I said earlier, what do you do with that information? So we outlined 4 practical considerations in the paper for market participants to sort of look for and think about as they engage in the market. So the first one is cooperation. So how do you leverage the strengths of the various approaches, whether that's a jurisdictional program, a project-based approach? How do these approaches sort of learn from each other, work together to maximize impact of sort of any approach to, protecting forests? The other thing we wanted to point out, and practical consideration number 2, was continuous improvement. So in the market we're seeing today a lot of improvements and evolution in science, technology, best practices, and we thought we should really sort of state very clearly how important it is for the market as a whole to embrace that sort of value of continuously improving, adopting these best practices, kind of moving forward all together kind of incrementally instead of trying to make these larger step changes that are maybe a little bit more disruptive. Another thing that we identified as a practical consideration is the equitable allocation of risk across the market. So in order to sort of have that kind of cooperation that we want to see and to continuously improve in the market, people need to be willing to take a certain degree of risk in the market. And so we elaborate that further in the recommendations section, which I won't get into in this panel quite yet. But that was one of the things, is just making sure that people in the market are really sort of taking on their fair share of risk, I guess, really. And then finally, supporting a just transition. So basically all carbon crediting activities really must properly involve IPLCs, certainly when you talk about REDD+, obviously, which is the basis of this paper. And the revenues and benefits from the carbon crediting activities must be appropriately distributed across all stakeholders. So maybe just a few other things. So we'll be talking about REDD+ on this panel. That was certainly the topic of the paper, and in some ways it was almost used as a bit of a case study, because the idea with this paper is, as we're seeing the market evolve across all different types of sectors, and I think overheard you briefly talking about it, Christy, just now, the Energy Transition Accelerator, for example, jurisdictional approaches aren't just happening in REDD+, and so to the extent possible, we really wanted to make sure that this paper could sort of be extrapolated and applied to other sectors as well. And I think I'll leave it at that. The paper's available on our website, so I urge you to check it out. Many of the panelists here contributed heavily to sort of helping us come to these conclusions, recommendations, practical considerations. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And I would very much like to introduce all of the various panelists. I think I'll leave the predominant introducing to you all, but I'll start with you, Angela, to just say a few words about yourself and the organization you represent.
Yes, thank you. And before I get started, I just want to say the paper is truly incredibly helpful. So if you haven't gone, I'm not, I wasn't paid for this, but definitely check out the paper. It's very well put together. The jurisdictional and project-based approaches by AIDA on their website. So I'm Angela Foster-Rice. I'm General Counsel and SVP of Policy and Market Innovation at Everland. And I guess we're going to spend a couple of minutes and go through what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
So Everland focuses on getting financing directly to local and indigenous populations in forested estates. So we help get funding direct so that they can work on the front lines of deforestation and do what they need to do to stop deforestation, which varies from community to community, whether that's healthcare or education or just new jobs that allows them to have an economic structure so they can push back both on illegal deforestation, but also even legal deforestation to make sure they have a good power source to push back. And we think it's important to provide that financing directly so that IPCLC communities not only are engaged in the process, but are actually developing and creating what happens on the ground. So that's our role. And we do that by partnering with some of the best project developers in the world, Wildlife Works, Wildlife Conservation Society, and they in turn work not only with the communities, but also with the government, so at the national level and the local level to make sure that the projects put together are fit for purpose for those landscapes and those governments. And then what we do is we go and get the financing. We go and, whether that's project financing or it's actually just going and finding the buyers to help support that great work. And that means learning very, very deeply about the project in and out in the policy landscape and know the players. And be able to not only tell the stories about what's happening and help people locally tell their stories and the governments, but also be able to provide the data behind the things that we're talking about. When you're talking about education and healthcare, what's the data behind that? How does it really support what you're saying? And the reality is it's working. Of course, REDD+ and all these things can get better. But I'm proud to say we've been able to bring over $100 million to communities and governments working to stop deforestation in Latin America and Africa and in Southeast Asia. So that's what I do, and I'll pass off to Angela.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you, Helen. My name is Angelo Sartori. I am the Director of Regional Engagement in BERA. We administrate the BCS program to certify and issue and verify carbon units in the framework of a REDD project. Also, we have the jurisdictional and nested REDD Plus approach, GNR, obviously to have jurisdictional approaches. I used to be the national focal point of REDD Plus in my country, in Chile, almost 10 years. I was supporting then all the time jurisdictional programs, and more recently, from the year 2018, working in BERA, more related to the project scale. So for me, right now, having the experience to be from the more governmental side, promoting jurisdictional approaches, and right now promoting more project-level approaches, I am very clear that both things need to be aligned and work together. Normally, government have some restrictions in terms how to implement some incentive in terms to avoid deforestation and forest degradation, and obviously the private projects can support and to be aligned in all the framework of the jurisdictional program that obviously consider more technical things related about baseline and MRB system, but also in turn to address the environmental and social safeguard that are also very important and a critical thing right now in several jurisdictional programs that we know and several projects that we are certifying in different levels. So later I will let you know a little more what we are doing in terms of a new REDD methodology that is following this specific approach to align project scale situation with jurisdictional approaches, and also a little more about our GNR approach that is 100% related to jurisdictional things, where the project, the program developer had to be a governmental agency, but also in the framework of GNR, you have the possibility to include nested projects there to maintain the two-level working in the field to reduce or avoid deforestation and forest degradation. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelo. Yeah, go ahead, Edith.
Thanks a lot. Good morning. My name is Edith Kiss. I'm co-founder and chief commercial officer at Integrity Global Partners. Thanks a lot for having me on this very interesting panel, and fully agree that I think this paper is very timely and has some very interesting recommendations. So at Integrity Global Partners, we are a mission-driven company focusing on exclusively on nature-based solution space. Started about a year ago, really with the core mission of unlocking capital to help scale this market, and while at the same time increasing the bar, raising the bar in integrity. So obviously coming to the market at a very critical time. We are in this transition period, and we have come in to see how we can help restore that confidence. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of work has happened throughout the year on the supply side integrity, demand side integrity, but we're also coming at in the middle around financing, how we can bring in equitable financing, because obviously we need to have a lot of capital to come in to scale, and we need to make it right, that it becomes also a part of the equation. So we're really focusing on institutional capital and the financial investor space. And one of the biggest barriers still in this market is the lack of high quality or high integrity supply. And therefore we are looking at really this early stage funding gap. There's a capacity gap as well, but really the early stage funding gap, where coincidentally we think that also the integrity piece is decided, because that's the at the very early stage you have to think about the design, how you engage communities, how you structure, who you partner with. And when you're a buyer or an investor, actually you have a much less limited capacity to influence that. So we think that it has to start at the very beginning. So another maybe point, just where we're coming from, is we really, in order to bring in this capital, we see that we have to have a holistic approach. Just based on carbon, it's very challenging. So we're focusing more on a broader natural capital and applying this holistic landscape approach, where even for restoration, you need to understand where is some remaining forest, high conservation value forest, because it doesn't matter where you plant your trees and what you plant, and having this approach allows for a broader impact approach, which will help with the biodiversity and other socioeconomic issues. In that context, we're also looking at cook stoves and other technologies to help with the communities. And for the communities, for livelihoods, and also the gender lens, which we feel that often is not focused enough. So with that approach, we have a broader approach. Just to mention that, but obviously REDD Plus has a very important place to play, and I think when we talk about jurisdictions, it's REDD Plus, but just wanted to explain that in our vision, it has to have this kind of more broader approach, even for restoration and other sectors. When it comes to the REDD Plus, we are looking at both the project and the jurisdictional level. Obviously, there have been a lot of successful projects that have had a critical work in the last decade, and now we're seeing finally the first jurisdictional programs and credits coming to the market. I'm sure we will hear more from on Costa Rica as well, and Ghana and other ones. Where we really want to focus our effort is, though, the combination. We haven't had exactly what you mentioned. I think the crux is how you can make both at the same time, so fully nesting, allowing projects on the ground, but also having that framework, and also the government level, which I think is the next level, hopefully, on the market to crack. And that could be, we are very, very happy to see the consolidated methodology come finally out, and I think that's a game changer, because it will help with the activity data and with the having the same common denominator. There is much more work that needs to be done, and we're very excited to see that where are those jurisdictions that this dual approach can be tested and brought to the market.
So thank you. So hi, my name is Christy Matrikarth. I'm the Managing Director of the Architecture for REDD Plus Transactions. Most people know us as ART or Art Trees. Trees is our standard, Art is the program, but we like Art Trees as well. So really what we are, in case you have not heard of us, is a jurisdictional REDD Plus program. So we focus on accessing markets and different forms of finance for governments. So our program proponents are national governments or large subnational governments. Really, we were created because we wanted to have a means for governments to access the market. It hadn't really existed in a true market-based form. You know, there were amazing things from the World Bank or the Green Climate Fund, but there wasn't one that was purely jurisdictional REDD. We also really deliberately designed a flexible standard to accommodate all sorts of different nesting arrangements, which we can talk about in a little bit, but that was our goal, was we pretty strongly feel that no one scale can do it on its own. You can't just do projects, you can't just do government-led. You have to find a way to have them work together. So we wanted to provide those enabling conditions to allow that to happen. So I'm excited to say that we have, as of yesterday, 19 governments that are in our pipeline. If you give me 24 hours, we'll have 20. There'll be an announcement tonight. But it's very exciting. And as it mentioned, we had our first issuance last year to the government of Guyana. We have 2 more governments currently under validation and verification, and then 3 or 4 scheduled to start in the first quarter of next year. So it's really exciting to see this move beyond the theory and actually show proof of concept, up to including the government of Guyana had their first benefit sharing. So 242 indigenous communities received the funds directly to their bank account and are now free to spend the money on the projects that they've chosen. So it's really exciting to see all these steps finally coming to fruition. On a personal note, I guess I will say that I spent 10 years as a validation and verification person. I think we were actually Vera's first verifiers, but now I realize that makes me sound old, so we'll just say that I graduated college at 5. but so I've been in this space for a while, and then I spent 10 years as a project developer. So I am well aware of the amazing things that projects can do, and that's why I was excited to be part of a program really fostering this space for all the scales at the same time. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Bloomgarden. I'm the founder and CEO of Emergent. Emergent is a nonprofit, mission-focused. The mission is to achieve zero deforestation or net zero deforestation. We are the creators and managers of the LEAF Coalition. So the idea behind the LEAF Coalition initially was we need to send a very strong and at scale demand signal to jurisdictions to drive the scale in this market. And so LEAF is a public-private partnership. So we have approaching 30 companies and 4 donor countries that have collectively committed over $1 billion to purchase exclusively jurisdictional REDD Plus and exclusively to the Art Trees standard. So we essentially have 3 main functions at Emergent with regard to the LEAF Coalition. The first is we manage all the components of the coalition itself, recruiting new companies, recruiting new host jurisdictions, and all of the mechanics and guts of the coalition. The second is we're the transaction platform. So we act as a riskless principal. So we actually take ownership of the credits. We face all of the parties. We are the off-taker from the host jurisdictions, and we are the seller to the corporates, and we are we also have hold the agreements with the host jurisdiction. So we are the transaction platform. And third, we've built what we call fund management and reporting system, because when it comes to jurisdictional REDD, it's also important that the money gets to the right place. And so we built a fiscal system, a fund management system, to ensure that the money is reinvested into, to support the host jurisdictions and DC. I mentioned we're focused exclusively on the jurisdictional level. That's largely for scale. We think we need to move very far and fast if we're going to have the impact that's needed to both on the climate side and the deforestation side. We're fans of projects, or let's say high integrity projects done the right way, and we think there is a there is a pathway for them to coexist. I think for those who feel like there's a sort of a fight or an either or between projects and jurisdictions, I think that's both a symptom of the lack of a real example that we can look at, but also a bit of a symptom of what's happening in the overall market, which is voluntary carbon market remains a very, very small market and contracting, right? So in a market that was growing at scale, we wouldn't be, wouldn't have to, there wouldn't be a feeling of fighting over scraps, if I can say that. So I think this community, broadly, I would say we should be finding ways to rapidly scale the voluntary carbon market that will support both projects and jurisdictions, right? That's the only way, on the demand side, I should say. It's the only way that the voluntary carbon market is going to deliver on the promises that, let's say the task force has made and that are being talked about here at COP. Anyway, look forward to the conversation, and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Jessica. And also, I just wanted to say thank you to Ellen for inviting me to the panel. It's really nice to be here. My name is Jessica Orrego, and I am the NCS director at Mercuria. Mercuria Energy Group is a commodity trading firm based in Switzerland. I'm part of the environmental products team within that company, and we are present in all of the environmental markets, including the voluntary carbon market. My time and work is focused on the NCS part of our voluntary carbon market work. So we are focused on a variety of project types. So we are not, exclusive to JRED, but we do have 3 ERPAs signed with jurisdictions. So we're working in 3 jurisdictions right now. 2 are actively working now to submit documentation. Actually, one has already submitted documentation. Actually, both of them have submitted documentation, sorry. One to ART and one to ART Trees, and one to the Vera's jurisdictional nested REDD program. So we're working directly with both of those subnational jurisdictions to register credits in the coming year. We also have a portfolio that's focused also on projects. So we are investing in strategic, in high integrity REDD projects using the new REDD methodology. We have, for example, one in Peru where we're working directly with a consortium of community-driven and indigenous organizations. We also, in March, our company announced a $500 million capital commitment to invest in nature, so it will be with a large focus on restoration, but other types of activities as well, and that will focus on both carbon and non-carbon attributes and investments. We also are working in other geographies in Africa and Latin America on other investments in forest restoration and improve forest management with small-scale holders, for example. So we absolutely, 100% see the importance of both project-level action and ambition, and working directly with nonprofits on the ground and also with indigenous people and local communities. But also at the jurisdictional level, we see that that's also in a lot of ways the direction of travel of the market. The approach and the ambition that it drives immediately addresses some of the issues that we've seen in the market, and we definitely feel that the resulting credits are going to be very high integrity. And we also are completely in the trenches with at least the 2 very active jurisdictions that we're working with, and it's extremely challenging and difficult and a lot of work. So there's a lot of capacity constraints, and we're working really hard to fill those gaps. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're going to get there. And it's great to see mechanisms in the market now where some private finance can drive some of that ambition and some of that work. So really happy to see that happening. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much to each of you. Really an amazing panel. I'm so glad I was able through, AIDA to gather all of you together because, it was fantastic to hear about all the work you're doing. Very much feels like the paper is sort of coming alive off the pages in some ways. Lots about blended approaches and sort of the work that many of you are doing sort of across the market, both projects and jurisdictional approaches. We have two standards on the panel, which is great to hear from sort of two different perspectives on that front. From the investment side as well, and it sort of built up nicely to your remarks, Jessica, about sort of money actually flowing on the ground. Really nice to hear, and also so much progress and activity, right? I mean, like a few of you mentioned things that have happened in a matter of like a few weeks, which is really cool and exciting. So thanks so much to all of you for being here, and those of you in the room as well. Very excited to get started, and we have lots of time, which is nice, I think, as well. So I think we can get into a bit of a moderated Q&A here. And so I will start, Christy, with you, if that's all right. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of, and you've sort of started us off with your introductory remarks, but really like what is the current landscape in your mind when it comes to jurisdictional approaches sort of across the market, or maybe just tell us a little bit more about what ART's up to. And then I guess I should say too, for the panel kind of at large, feel free to come in as well, right? So I'll sort of kick it off with one panelist, and then if others want to come in, comment, debate, feel free to go for that. But we do have some questions prepared as well. So start with you, Christy. Thanks.
Sure. Well, I feel honored to be the first one to kick off. And I realized I failed to say earlier, Ellen, congratulations to you for getting through that paper, because yes, we helped contribute, but it was a tremendous amount of work on your part to pull it together. So thank you for all your time and effort there. So as far as jurisdictional, I think several of the panelists mentioned that there is an increased recognition that jurisdictional is the wave of the future, though not the only thing that can happen, right? There are some things only governments can do, but there are some things that are really best done at a smaller scale. So I think, at least as far as our panel, we're all in agreement that you need everything, right? It's not an either or. So as ART, really our focus was to focus on the governmental piece and really ensure high quality and a means to access the market for the governments, but to provide the conditions where there are a lot of different options. So, for example, we don't prescribe how nesting has to occur. So we don't have an allocation methodology. We leave it up to the governments to discuss with the stakeholders. They could use an approach like I'm sure we'll hear about in a moment, or they can use something else. But I think, one of the joys of jurisdictional is this holistic planning across the landscape. So, whether there are projects or not, there might just be smaller scale efforts that are not independent projects. For example, I think all of us in the project world have had really amazing activities that made no sense financially to do as a standalone project, but as a jurisdictional program, you can include those types of activities as part of the jurisdiction and still share revenue and engage a broader array of stakeholders. So I think that's an amazing opportunity. I think there's opportunities for planning for things like leakage or the risk of reversals, reversal mitigation. If you're planning across an entire jurisdiction in collaboration with the project developers or the communities, I think you just have opportunities to do a better job and really get at the root cause of some of the drivers of deforestation than you could if you were just doing it project by project. So I think there's many opportunities there. I think there's also a growing recognition in the market that it's not all about carbon, right? So one of the things that ART is doing, somewhat building on what you were saying, Edith, you need to incentivize good holistic decisions. So you may be aware, ART is developing a co-benefit certification where we're going to have parameters and indicators around social cultural benefits, biodiversity benefits, and we need a better name, but right now it's all the things that forests do that is not sequestering carbon, right? So all the ecosystem services and other things that they do. Because to us, it's really important to have a consistent set of criteria that each of the governments would report on. It helps them tell their story. Every government you talk to says, well, the current market, I can't get the price that I think I deserve because I'm doing all these amazing things and having these impacts. The current market doesn't reflect what Indigenous peoples want to see out of REDD+, and we recognize that. So we're excited to be working with our committee to develop a module that reflects their values and their views. And on the buyer side, what we keep hearing is, well, sure, I'd like to pay more, but I don't have verified, consistent data. I can send a due diligence checklist, but who's checking that? Everyone's going to rate something that's good. So, they were also expressing that this is something that would be powerful to them. And then ultimately, as a program, we realize that what gets measured and reported on gets done and gets thought about when they're designing programs. So we think it's important to have all these pieces in play so that when governments are designing REDD Plus programs with all of their stakeholders, that it's a holistic view. So we really see that as the wave of the future. And I think that there are several, countries that we're talking to. I mean, we don't, like I said, we don't prescribe how nesting is occurring, but we are aware of a lot of different efforts in different regions, all a little bit different, really reflecting their unique circumstances, but that I think we'll start seeing a proof of concept that it can happen, because I think there's just ongoing recognition that this is what is necessary. So I will pause there. I could talk about this all day, so feel free to ask me questions later, but.
Great, thanks.
And I do.
Thanks, Christy. Did anyone else want to come in on that point? Otherwise, I'll move to Angela, maybe just to quickly give us an overview or just your thoughts really on how projects kind of fit into this evolving market and space, right? And what's going on the project level, I guess, is to the extent that you can speak to that, all projects.
All
but
projects.
Yeah, in your experience.
Yeah. So I think, projects have been around, for much longer, obviously been able to deliver benefits, during this, since the VCM came about. So there's been this time period that it's been out there doing its work on the ground, providing benefits, stopping deforestation. So I think it's had that huge head start in the process. I think that when we talk about projects, I think we're starting to figure this out, that both in terms of jurisdictions and projects, it's a mosaic of different way of approaches. There's not really two approaches, right? There's different ways that governments have engaged. So I'll just give an example of, in Cambodia, for example, we represent 2 projects there and 2 more that are being developed. And in those cases, while they are projects on the ground, like the Keosima project by the Wildlife Conservation Society, the VERPA is signed with the government. The government is fully engaged. And so, it's not one of these, a project kind of shows up and starts working on the ground and it's completely independent, but rather it's a holistic view. And when the financing comes in, there's a little bit that goes to the government and the rest goes to the community. So it's like the idea being that you want to support governments and their development of their broader national programs around REDD Plus, absolutely, and you want to make sure there's a way to get the funding direct to the ground. So in that structure, you have, it's an escrow structure. So it's not the money doesn't go into the government and go down. It goes a little bit to the government, a lot to the communities, and then they get to decide how they want to use the funding for infrastructure, healthcare, whatever it is that they want to use the money for. So that's, and then over time you're seeing, and then also I'll say actually in Cambodia they're developing, their national programs around their baselines. They haven't quite gotten to the point where you have formally, kind of formal nested in, like where you're hinged right into it. But there's complete transparency around the data and how it fits within the baselines, the national. Baselines, the FELs. So, and then over time, like we're talking about, well, maybe there'll be some part that's correspondingly adjusted. Maybe there's other parts that aren't. So that's just an example of what is a project, but is actually has a jurisdictional anchoring, but it's just not a fully jurisdictional nested project. And then you have other countries that are just they're developing, what are the rights and the governance and the social safeguards, in a particular country. So I think about like in Kenya, and also around, what amount of money should formally go to the government. So you see those structures happening, even though, again, you don't yet have a formal structure just so formally nest in. And then another example is actually in the Mayandambe province, which is a project by Wildlife Works. They actually are nested into the structure of the province. It actually is a formally nested project. That is a project formally nested. So you're seeing a lot of different aspects of this. I think over time, I imagine we'll see all kinds of structures. And I think that's actually a good thing, because it allows a host government and also the local indigenous populations to decide, like, what is it that's going to work for this community, what's going to work for this government, what's going to work for this landscape. And I think that we historically, particularly in REDD Plus, that there's been a view that those from the outside can come in and tell governments and local communities, better what they should be doing when really we need to be working side to side. I think it's important to let those individuals, those people, make their own decisions about how they want to approach this.
Great. Thanks, Angela. Yeah, I really appreciate you sort of, laying that out for us and importantly talking about all the different types of approaches, which was one of the big messages in the paper too, unsurprisingly. But yeah, a really important point of sort of how do projects fit into this sort of, evolving world and all the different ways that they can do that. Did anyone else want to come in on the project topic? Otherwise, edit? Yeah. Okay, later on. Okay, perfect. Well, I think the next question I had lined up was for you, Jessica, around, what exactly, we have this shift and we've all talked about it so far towards jurisdictional approaches, and I think it came up a little bit in your, intro remarks and others' remarks as well. But what exactly is the role that we're expecting, jurisdictional approaches to play in the market? How is that a shift maybe from what we've seen in the past? And what do you think they might solve or change in the market, maybe from what we've been seeing?
Okay. I think that the role that jurisdictional REDD Plus is about to play a big role in the market because, as Aaron mentioned, they are already actively, are about to transact with jurisdictions. Christy mentioned that there's 20 jurisdictions soon. Okay, 19 and a half. And we have ERPAs as well, so there's going to be a lot of credits in the market. So the bottom line is that it's going to start actually be something that's very available to the market. So in that sense, it's something that we all have to understand. I think my one observation, I think LEAF has helped a lot because there's such a market signal and so much, you're very good at, better than us at communications and public relations. So it's been actually very good for the market to understand that there are whatever number of organizations and sovereigns interested in purchasing those credits. But still, even then, I think that as a market, we need to do some buyer education still. I think that there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding about what JRED is. I think, I've talked to, for example, the rating agencies, and some of them are still a little bit confused about how to rate it or what kind of framework to use. I think that, for example, the reason why that paper was written was because there is some confusion. I think that's going to be something that's our homework, I think, as a group, and I think a lot of us are going to be very involved in that, and we're already doing some of that market education. So that's one thing. I think in terms of why it's going to be important to make that distinction is because I think both project level and JRED are very, very important. I think we're going to really have to just continue to invest in both, but also really make the distinction of why the benefits are different. One is very local, one is really driven on very, very high-risk areas of forests that you can really kind of connect the dots and address the drivers of deforestation very locally and work with the communities that are living in or around them. Whereas jurisdictional, you're driving governance, you're enforcing policy, you're creating new policies, you're driving change across multiple sectors, you're working with not just the forest sector, but all parts of society, the agribusiness, indigenous and local communities, the forest sector, government, different agencies within the government. So obviously very complex, but absolutely necessary to really drive down that deforestation and degradation. So, absolutely is going to be essential to explain that to the market so they realize how critical it is to buy those credits.
Great, thanks for that, Jessica. Edit, did you want to come in? Or no? Okay, I thought so. Okay, perfect. Well, I mean, if you want to say something about sort of what role you see projects continuing to play, feel free to do that now.
Thanks. Very, very good points and fully agreed. So I think when you ask the question of what's the role of projects in the future, I mean, the reality is very simple. By 2030, we have to stop deforestation. So if we want to have any chance with the 1.5 degrees. So will projects suffice? No, absolutely not. That's why we need, and we are excited about the jurisdictional programs. But are jurisdictions in every country everywhere ready? No, they are not. As we know, we heard that Jessica and others, and we have been talking to some governments where they said simply, well, I prefer to have something locally driven because I don't know if the money will arrive to the ground, right? So you have to build those fiscal structures and benefit share mechanism, and that takes time, and you have to get it right. So I think it's very, it's an end, and again, from our perspective, projects have been at the forefront, building us all this experience and lessons, and they will remain very important building blocks, and I think that's absolutely clear. And the vision, I mean, we have spent a decade a little bit not arguing about this, but figuring out how to get this right. But the vision, I think, for everybody has been that the projects will, over time, have to migrate into a top-down system, and whether it's a jurisdictional, whether it's your NDCs, whether it's just not possible to do otherwise, right? So we're trying to solve a market failure, and the governments need to step in. That's full stop. We know that, right? And we just don't have better tools. And actually, for private capital, you need projects because it's very hard for private capital to engage with governments, except if you think about maybe capital markets and green bonds. And there's something that we also at Integrity looking at very, very strongly, because I think to get the scale of financing, you need to tap into those markets as well. And then on Angela's point, I again fully agree that there are different flavors, and what we need to just, I think, put in our heads when we talk about projects is that with the Paris Agreement now, there's a lot of talk about blurring the compliance and voluntary, and what is something that is very clear is that what happened in the past, that you could just do a project without talking to the government and look the other way around, that's not possible, right? So we do believe that the first step is to engage the governments. You need to get hopefully the letter of approval system, which we had under the Kyoto Protocol, now is coming back. It will help governments to also understand the communication. A lot of talk about carbon regulations, all this government coming up because like, oh, what's happening, all these assets going out. So, all that. We need to get ahead of that and ensure that, again, projects are fully coordinating with the government policies. So I think on those levels, it's changing the landscape, but again, it shows a good integration. And then finally, on Aaron's, just to react on that, I totally agree. I think here the challenge us collectively, it's not anymore and or. We understand we have both levels. We need to full speed, still have time. But collectively, I think the biggest risk is that right now this attack or like flight to removals and even technology versus nature. So I think we really need demand. It's all about demand. As you said, if suddenly all those jurisdictions come on the market floods, and then the market, right, who's going to buy them, right? So collectively need to keep that momentum and explain to buyers, investors that this is not a choice, right? You can't just plant trees and engineer us out of this climate crisis. So I think that's how I see where we need to just collectively move ahead and now continue build that business case and find ways to channel capital to both projects and both jurisdictions.
Great, thanks so much, Edith. Angelo, coming to you now, and speaking of very recent developments in the market, how does Vera's new REDD methodology sort of fit into this landscape and sort of what we've heard on the panel so far?
Thank you. With the new methodology, we are trying to comply with several things, obviously related to the new requirements of all the stakeholders related to the voluntary carbon market, but also in terms of the compliance carbon market, in terms, for example, CORSIA, and also whatever is happening in the framework of the Article 6. We are working very close with different governments in developed and developing countries to be aligned with the bilateral agreements, for example, in the framework of the Article 6.2, in terms that the new methodology comply with all the things that two governments, a host government and a buyer government, are deciding to include in this kind of agreement. And also a very important thing, we are working very close to several REDD countries with developing countries and government in this scale to understand very good what they are doing in terms of domestic regulations. For example, when they have right now or are thinking to have domestic carbon market, and also to regulate all the transactions that will happen in the future in the framework of the Article 6 with corresponding adjustment. And all the governments that we know at the moment where we have memorandum of understanding or we are trying to formalize something with them are totally agree that they need projects. They need projects in the field to reduce the deforestation, the forest degradation in the framework of the jurisdictional approaches that they are implementing, obviously at national or in some cases at subnational level. So the new methodology is considering everything that I mentioned. The main technological, probably different in terms of the new methodology with the old ones is that we are following a top-down approach. That means that we are collecting activity data at national or subnational level in different countries to provide in the future from the BERA side and allocate the baseline at the project level. So everything will be aligned with for example, the forest reference level of the governments, using almost the same activity data to avoid any problem in the future in terms of inflated baseline or something that can mean a double counting thing. So right now in our website, we have the new methodology. The new methodology is ready, and the new methodology also have different modules. Right now is also ready the module to estimate the emission reduction related to unplanned deforestation. During next year, 2024, we will also will be working on the module related to planned deforestation and forest degradation. So that is very important. But the good news here is that the majority of the project that we have right now in the pipeline using the old methodologies are unplanned deforestation. So right now, this project next year need to update everything and follow the technical aspect of the new methodology. That is very important from this point of view. This year, in June or July, we hired several external providers to collect activity data in the first round of jurisdictions to collect the information that we need to use in the framework of the new methodology, and specifically in the framework of the unplanned deforestation model. Right now we have in our website a new request for proposal with the second list of countries where we are collecting the data. So we are working together with several companies, providers that they have experience in this field to collect the activity data in a high quality way. So when we have ready the activity data for all of these jurisdictions, you have to use, as project developer, but working together with BERA staff, you have to use a risk mapping tool. The risk mapping tool is related to a risk of the project area to the deforestation that will happen in the future, obviously analyzing the historical data. So all this approach, the new methodology, the specific model related to unplanned deforestation, and the risk mapping tool will allow in the future that BERA allocate the portion that corresponds to any specific project area of the baseline. So we will follow this very standardized approach, aligned in terms of the jurisdictional base of the activity data with the governmental information that normally countries submit to the UNFCCC. This is very important also from the project developer point of view, because when you allocate the baseline, later you as project developer can reduce time and cost in terms of the validation and verification phase, because this will be almost automatically pre-validated because BERA will allocate this specific information. So that is very important in terms to reduce the certification cycle of the project to final issuance, the verified carbon units, and we know that several project developers are waiting to have a volume of the BCUs ready to sell in the market at the moment. In terms to comply with the more general thing, 2 weeks ago or three weeks ago, we submit our application of the BCS program to the Carbon Core Principle of the ICBCN. The new methodology was included there, so we hope that early next year we will have approved all the things that we included in the submission. Obviously, the new methodology is there. That is something very good to investors, project developers, validation and verification bodies, government, and all the people that have confidence instead of the extra control that the ICBCN is putting in all the JSG international crediting program. The same will happen probably in March, April next year when the new window to send updates to ICAO in CORSIA is open. We are thinking to submit the new REDD methodology. Right now, we don't have any of the old REDD methodologies approved in the framework of CORSIA, so we hope to have the new methodology approved there in the framework of CORSIA. And also, next year, we have a hard work to align wherever is needed instead of the new requirements of the new methodology with the requirement of GNR, because there are some specific things that we need to align with our jurisdictional approach. But finally, everything with the new methodology is trying to comply with these international and national regulations. We know that the investor, the buyers, the brokers, the people more related to the demand side is also expecting to have the first BCUs with the issuance in the framework of the new methodology. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Angelo. I might throw you a bit of a curveball, Aaron, here, going off script a little bit. But I was thinking about, you mentioned, I think you were maybe one of the only who mentioned the role of governments as buyers of these credits. And I, as you know, someone at AIDA, I can't help myself but think about Article 6. Is that, are you seeing Article 6 playing a role in that? Is it something you're tracking very closely while you're here in Dubai? And maybe just speak a little bit more broadly to the role of governments as buyers of these credits.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So when we launched LEAF, we intentionally structured it in such a way that the public sector participants on the donor side are not actually taking delivery of the credits. So they're not using those credits for Article 6 purposes or for any sort of compliance purposes. It's actually, I think it's interesting. The structure of LEAF is that the donor governments, so particularly US, UK, and Norway, are providing essentially a purchase guarantee at $10 per ton. So what that means is that we write forward offtake agreements with the supplier host jurisdictions, and in some portion, part of the offtake would come from corporates who have a fixed price, fixed forward, and the other portion would be from the donor governments who are providing the purchase guarantee. And then it's Emergent's role to, for the portion that has been underwritten by the governments, to sell that into the market for a market price, as long as it's $10 or above. So what that does is, right, so the actual design and our hope is that this market grows as such that it would be great if we never had to pull the money down from the donor governments, because we're able to sell the credits into the market for a higher price. And that higher price all goes back to the host jurisdiction. So we did that intentionally because we didn't want to get ahead of the Article 6 negotiation. Do I think there is an opportunity moving forward that governments are a buyer of ITMOs? Yes, absolutely, and we're having those conversations within LEAF, but we're not doing that right now. And as I say, the governments won't. The government participation or participants on the demand side won't take any delivery. If the market doesn't show up at a price higher than 10, and we do exercise that purchase guarantee, then those credits will get retired before and not delivered to the government participants.
Thanks for clarifying that, Aaron.
Sure.
I think maybe what I'll do at this point, and I have a couple more questions in my back pocket that I'm curious to hear from all of you, but maybe we'll open it to the floor for a little bit. If there are questions in the room, please go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, do we have? Yeah, perfect, thanks. There's a mic coming from the back.
Well, thank you, and thank you all the panelists. I mean, it's really great to see, this jurisdictional and project level coming together to bring the changes that we all need. I'm interested to hear the perspectives. I'm Beto Borges from Forest Trends, And Forest Friends, we believe that both jurisdictional and project level are important. And but I'm interested to hear the perspective of our colleagues in regards to both how jurisdictional and project approach recognize and reward the carbon ownership rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, and Afro-descendants, if they may, please. So both, in other words, not necessarily which one is better, but how do you go about recognizing and rewarding carbon ownership rights? Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anyone from the panel who wants to jump in on that one first? Jessica, great, thanks.
Thanks, Beta. That's a very relevant question. So there, luckily, both in JNR and ART, they have very robust safeguards requirements. Even though when you read them, they're different, we are implementing them as if they were the same. So, we are basically applying the Cancun safeguards in every respect. But really, a huge part of that, when it comes to engaging all relevant stakeholders, is the consultation and participatory process. And that has to absolutely start with mapping out all of the actors and ensuring that there's a very, very transparent process in engaging all of the actors. In some cases, we're also seeing that probably some of the stakeholders are going to need capacity building outside of, what we can fund, to enable that effective participation and be able to advocate for their own position on some of the consultations and their input. So, we're seeing that a lot of consultation, a lot of transparency is absolutely essential, and engagement very, very early on, and, also just understanding those actors. So recognizing that, maybe a coalition, of course, that is a relevant stakeholder of Indigenous people, but you also have to talk to the individual communities as well, so make sure to get through to every single layer of their own structure, including the communities themselves. So let's see, what else about that? Another key aspect that we're seeing is just the importance of designing those benefit sharing mechanisms in a very, very transparent way, and understanding that it might not just be cash payouts. There's a lot of non-monetary benefits that are, and I think we talked a little bit about it for those direct project benefits. Well, those benefits can go straight to communities that would otherwise be project stakeholders as well, like education, like land tenure, like other kinds of important livelihood benefits. So we're seeing that that's a really huge part of any benefit sharing program. Benefit sharing programs in our mind have kind of two very strong benefits. First, clarifying that legal ownership, right? You are actually providing benefits to those who have the rights to the carbon, but also to incentivize. So there's, you have to implement a REDD+ strategy in a way that respects the safeguards, but and also provides incentives to the stakeholders that are driving deforestation or are protecting the forests already. And then finally, I think I would add, and I would really like to get those guys to say a little bit more about that, but both standards have, I think, very robust requirements for demonstrating legal ownership of the carbon and of the emission reduction. So there's a lot of work done to clarify that legal ownership when you submit your documentation, and I think that that's a very good exercise. You usually have to engage legal experts and others, and I think that that's an important part of this process.
Thanks, Jessica. Angela, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, from Vera's side, the GNR approach, the jurisdictional one, requests that you need to comply with the REDD+ safeguard of Cancun. Yeah, but more important than that is to comply with the national interpretation of the safeguard of Cancun, that normally are very specific, and all countries have a specific interpretation of each one. Because if you take the decision of the safeguards of the COP in Cancun, almost, I think, more than 10 years ago, are very general. But normally the countries are doing an interpretation that is more specific, in some cases even, for example, related to the engagement with the rural and indigenous communities, to follow step by step in terms, for example, to identify all the stakeholders involved in the jurisdiction, how you need to do the public and indigenous consultation. But it's not only this approach that covers the jurisdictional surface in a country or in a province. Later, if you have projects inside the jurisdiction, you also need to comply with the BCS program at project scale of the safeguards. And right now, we have in the last version of the program, the version 4.5, new requirements, for example, to respect, obviously, the human rights and several things in terms how a project developer in the scale of the project need to comply with several very specific safeguards. And right now we are also updating again this specific section about safeguard and participation of the communities that we will announce next year in the version 5 of the standard. So if you have a mix between a jurisdiction where the government is leading the approach and also the project where there are several private project developers, you have two different levels to comply with the safeguards. And it's not everything related to only submit some papers. The validation and verification bodies need to go to the field and do interviews with the communities and need to be sure that all the consultation were done in a very good faith and all the people was involved. And if we then identify some compliance during the process of these interviews related to the validation and verification bodies, it's not possible to approve a validation or a verification process in any specific project.
Great, thanks,
Sorry,
Angelo.
can I
Okay,
just
go ahead, Christine.
jump in?
please do.
So, as the third person, totally agree with everything that was said here. So we also have art is based on the Cancun safeguards as well. I agree with Angelo. The Cancun safeguards are not verifiable as written, right? So on trees, what we've done is actually unpack them into, I think it's 16 themes, but a number of indicators that we require countries to report on. We do respect their sovereignty for their national interpretation, but we do want transparency and clarity of each of these points. One thing I will just add to what my colleagues have said, though, is that rights to the carbon are not always tied to land tenure. So we've also tried to make sure that our safeguards respect, customary rights and other rights that aren't specifically land tenure, because we want to ensure that people are getting the rights and the benefits that are due to them. So just to bring that up, that it's not always about land tenure, although that's important too.
Great, thanks so much, Christy and Jessica and Angelo as well, and thanks for the question. I think I saw another question, sorry, just there. Is there a mic?
Hey, before we move on, I just
Oh,
wanted
yeah,
to add a little bit
sure,
to that.
go
'cause
ahead.
I
This
think
is a good-
mostly
yeah,
been covered, but I will say just based on some of the specific projects that we've been involved in, that issue of land title and ownership and carbon rights is very crucial to the communities that live there, because they're the ones that, and particularly when you're talking about indigenous populations that have been, there for centuries and have, been the people who have protected the forest. It's not a small asterisk. It's actually integral to their right to be able, if they have the carbon rights, and it does depend upon the particular country, that's respected. So, it's not, so safeguards and benefit sharing is amazing, but actual legal ownership and carbon rights is a different thing. So we need to be able to respect that, and that's something that if you do, and that not that can't be done at any level of government engagement, but it's something that's something that we have worked very closely, or project developers, to respect and to expand those rights and ensure that communities can continue to be respected for their use of the landscape and that they have actual legal ownership.
Thanks, Angela. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm from a I'm from a project developer. We are quite interested in art, so I have two questions for Christina. The first one is because art has very high threshold for the project, like one whole country, or at least 2.5 million hectares. So how do you think to avoid the potential double counting in this large scale? If, for example, there are a lot of forest, maybe there are several forest projects in the country, or even more cook stove projects in a country. So how do you think about to avoid the potential double counting in this large scale project? And the second one, because we are a private project developer, and I think you know from your standard, it seems like you cooperate with the local governments or national governments. So what kind of role can we play in the project developer as a private company? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Wonderful questions. So to your first question on double counting. So in trees, we actually have section 13, which is all about how to avoid double counting. So, at the most basic, we require governments to identify any projects that are located in their accounting area, right? So as a jurisdictional program, we do not allow Swiss cheese, so they can't say, here's our jurisdiction and we're carving out all these areas. We do require monitoring and reporting across the entire jurisdiction. But that being said, if there are, it could even be another jurisdictional program. So if they have a World Bank FCPF program, for example, or they have Vera projects or Gold Standard or whomever, we do require them to identify and then they subtract out the credits verified under a different program. I'll be honest, that's why we're excited to see the consolidated methodology in some of these other programs because the math didn't always line up. The methodologies were very different. So we're excited to see Vera's leadership on that, and I hope that some of the other project level standards will also start to align. Another option, though, is under ART, like I said, we have lots of options. So one option is projects continue under a different program. They subtract off the credits to avoid double counting. Another option would be to fully nest and continue operating the project, but to receive a portion of trees credits or revenues or whatever arrangement is made with the government. So in that case, the project developer would have an art registry account, would receive their trees credits, and they could transact them as they see fit. Last but not least is the project could still continue to do their activities, but not do any MRV and just be completely folded into the jurisdictional MRV and still receive benefits. Again, trees credits or non-monetary benefits, as Jessica said, we leave that open to each group to negotiate. Our hope is very much that governments use all of those options because I think, really where we see the best success is if a jurisdictional REDD Plus program is being designed, that there are some areas where the government, has programs or knows that they can do a good job, but there's going to be areas where they can't do everything or they shouldn't be doing everything, to be blunt. So we look for, public-private partnerships we hope will flourish in those areas or community-led projects. And then, again, each group can negotiate, which of these options makes the most sense for them and makes it a win-win. So we see it as a really powerful option overall. So that sort of starts to answer your second question of, we see there's a lot of different opportunities. We also see, examples like with Mercuria, where private sector is working with governments to provide either upfront financing or technical assistance as part of the jurisdictional program development. We've seen projects that have been operating for a long time volunteering their expertise to do capacity building with the government of, hey, we know how to do MRV, we've been doing it, let us help you. As part of that, I am sure there's some negotiation on the benefit sharing, but we see that government should be taking advantage of all these really amazing efforts. One of the benefits for ART is that we're relatively new. So when we designed our program, we could build on 15 years of REDD Plus projects. We could build on the World Bank's experience. We could build on the Green Climate Fund. There were all these experiences that we could build from. So we're excited to keep trying to move the bar forward. So I'll stop there. Happy to talk more afterwards too, but we see that there's a lot of roles that we think private sector could really play.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks for the question. I know there's a question in the back, just there. Yeah. Oh, sorry, just behind you, Badr, just behind the camera.
Okay.
Thank you so much and good morning. Quick question to the panelists, anyone. How do you foresee addressing the fact that for jurisdictional programs to perform, you need a long-term commitment and implementation, which in most cases is going to be beyond what the governmental jurisdictional proponent will last. So how do you manage this divergence? Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the question. Anyone want to come in on that one?
I feel like I'm talking a lot.
So you're just meant in terms of jurisdictional, or do you mean?
Yeah, jurisdictional. So, I think for ART, so I agree that you cannot ask a government to say for 1,000 years they promised to do MRV, right? They're never going to say that. But I feel like there's a few different carrots as opposed to sticks all the time, right? So, there are certainly provisions around, if they leave the program and, their buffer pool contributions are canceled and things like that. But more long term, what we see as the incentive is if they have a really good program and they're receiving money, very few governments are going to be the ones that cut off money flowing to local communities or to the programs at the state. So I think if you have a robust program and they actually see the market incentive, that'll help. Another thing that I think helps from arts design is that we've deliberately tried to build it so that there is always a reason for them to keep improving their performance and participating. So we have our trees crediting level, which looks at reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. If they've reduced enough, they can use the removals approach and they can get credits for restoration of forests. If they're successful with both of those, we know the work has not ended. The threats are still there. They need to keep working. So then we have our high forest, low deforestation approach. And the idea is that you keep showing that there's a market incentive to keep getting better and that there would keep being investment and the market would see that. Obviously, if there are things like for CORSIA, they have to commit to 20 years of MRV. So, if they want to be CORSIA eligible, they would. To Angela's earlier remark, we're thrilled that we're one of 2 programs approved under ICAO's CORSIA for the first compliance period. So we're excited to have that recognition of our incentivization for the long term and addressing of the permanence. So I think there's various aspects to it, but I agree that you can't ask a government to sign on for 1,000 years. But I think there's other ways in the market to incentivize that long-term engagement.
Thanks, Christy. Angelo, and then Jessica.
Yes, I think there are 2 main factors to maintain the continuity of the jurisdictional programs led by governments. A good jurisdictional program had to be aligned and be framework in broader policies. It's not the program alone working in a country or any specific jurisdiction. So normally governments are including some specific goals to reduce the deforestation in the NDCs that have a timeline that is a long-term timeline where finally the jurisdictional REDD programs have to be involved, and not only in the international policies of the government like an NDC, normally are related to forestry policies that are thinking to have a specific timeline more than the next chain of the government. So that is very important to be sure that all the jurisdictional programs are aligned to broader national policies in this specific situation. And the second point is related to your question, Beto. When you design a jurisdictional program together with the communities that don't have any problem when the government change because they will be here all the time and they are supporting the program, independent who is the next government, probably all the activities in the field to reduce the deforestation and degradation will continue. So it's very important to have the approval, the engagement, and the participatory things in the very specific level with the rural and indigenous communities. So later, if something happen and a new government want to do a fundamental change with the jurisdictional program, probably the people that we will try to maintain everything in terms to reduce the deforestation and degradation will not the governmental people, will be the communities. So that is the main thing, the two points.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of actually going to say a lot of that same thing. So yeah, all incredibly good points. I think, there's absolutely no guarantee that deforestation is going to 100% decrease in any government. Governments change, political will certainly changes, but there are ways to de-risk that. And, so long-term purchase agreements are really important. That the clarity and optionality under the standards is really important, but policy is so important. So what we're doing with our governments is really going through a very robust process of articulating their low carbon development strategies and the REDD+ strategies, and then having a formal government approval process of that strategy. So it becomes kind of part of their policy. So it's not really, it becomes a little bit less optional. So that's, I think, a huge part of it as well. But I also agree that, driving some of that work and ambition at different levels of the government so that no matter what, even if the high level changes, some of that work and some of the funding is already kind of, driving some of the work on the ground is, I think, a key point that Angela made.
Great, thanks. I think we'd better move on to final remarks here. So one final question, and I think I'll give you each about a minute, minute or two, to answer it, if possible. But really bringing it back to integrity, I guess, and maybe you can pick one of these questions maybe. One of them is, so how does the work you're doing align with a high integrity market of the future, whether that's on projects or jurisdictional approaches or some sort of blend of both? And then the other question I'm curious about, and if any of you want to take this one, how do you see the future of REDD Plus in an ICVCM future? So either one of those, if you want to take one of those questions. And I'll start with Angela, and we can work our way down like we did at the start.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'd like to answer both of them, but I won't. Okay. So I think, interestingly, on the ICVCM and where that's going, I think it creates actually an opportunity for, perhaps even, others to get into the space, because it's another way of evaluating, what is quality. So I expect we'll see more, more organizations develop standards and to engage and to utilize ICVCM as a way to evaluate quality. So I didn't really talk about this earlier, but one of those, Equitable Earth, which Everland is doing along with Wildlife Works and Forest Trends to help put together a coalition that's focused on a standard for indigenous and local populations directly from the ground up. So I think that having the ICVCM creates that moniker of these are the integrity. This is what integrity and quality looks like, and so also allowing other market participants to develop new standards.
Yes, as I mentioned, we are doing several things to maintain REDD in terms to create this new methodology, working with several stakeholders from the private side and also from governmental side. So the response from our side is obvious in terms that we see a future of REDD Plus, not only in the framework of the voluntary carbon market, also in domestic carbon markets. Actually, in some countries like Colombia, is already working, and we know that several other countries that are developing domestic carbon market based in carbon taxes are thinking to include REDD. So we want that the BCS new REDD methodology will be eligible there at domestic level, and the same in compliance international carbon market like Article 6 and CORSIA. So for us, the future of REDD had to be there in all the different carbon markets. In the framework of the ICVCM, obviously we think we'll, after to approve everything that we have in the framework of the BCS program there, probably we'll have a new energy, everything related to, not only with the BCS program, with all the JSG crediting program that right now are under assessment there, because it's something that we know investor, buyers, and also the communities and governments want, in terms that somebody that oversee even what is happening in terms of the voluntary carbon market. So this extra confidence for us will be probably an extra energy to start a new era of the voluntary carbon market, and also related to everything at jurisdictional level and project level about REDD Plus.
Thank you. So as I mentioned on our side, we are really not having just a carbon focus, because we strongly believe that in nature-based sector of the carbon markets, you need to have a broader lens, a natural capital lens. And so I feel quite positive and optimistic on the future if you do it right. We really, and being right is that really thinking about carbon as a transition tool, as a transition finance that only will be high integrity, high quality, and permanent if it results in real economic change activities on the ground, which at the end has to be embedded into broader jurisdictional or national and policies. So I think from our side, again, having that landscape approach and that multi-revenue approach, which is really critical for getting financial investors into this space, is the crux of it, and not having a pure carbon lens, carbon trading lens, where you will end up with maybe monoculture plantations and like really narrow approaches. I think for us, from the integrity piece, that is where we see it happening, and have a quite high confidence that the new methodology will have the CCP label, and then we'll build back on that and the demand.
So thanks. So I'll try to answer both in my 1 minute. We'll see if this works. So I think certainly a lot of the quality initiatives are very important. You know, ART's also applied to ICVCM. We're part of the announcement you may have seen earlier in CAP, where many of the standards have agreed to work together to share lessons learned and try to improve as well. We will continue to do that, continue to apply under ICAO. I think as a program, though, we're also driven by what we think is best practice and high integrity. As I mentioned, with our co-benefits, we really feel strongly that we need to broaden the lens, and it's not just carbon, and we need to drive that. So we'll keep trying to identify really what's the best practice and how to get all of the levels involved in a really meaningful way and have some really holistic planning across a whole jurisdiction. As you've heard, it's not easy, but we really think it can be done, and it quite frankly has to be done if we're going to have the kind of success that we need and we want, and if it's going to be sustainable, whether it's over government changes or just over time. We need to have all those groups involved and be part of the planning, and it needs to look at more than a CO2 number. So we're excited to keep pushing the envelope on that and working with the other standards and the various quality initiatives to help bring confidence back into the market.
I think Emergent Leaf has stood up very well to integrity, let's say the kind of integrity scrutiny, and will continue to do such. It was first principles from us designing Leaf was that, you know, I actually talk about Leaf as a strategy to move the needle on a climate wedge, which is deforestation, and we use carbon as a tool to do that. But some of the corporates are less interested in carbon. But really, first principles was integrity, in that it was, you know, this mission was too important to get subject to scrutiny on integrity. So we did things like create buyer criteria. So, for example, we won't allow oil and gas companies into the coalition. Very high integrity standard, which is REDD, which is actually an outgrowth of the development of the Emergent and Leaf strategy. We're also intentionally created Emergent as a nonprofit intermediary, and any profits on resale would go back to the jurisdiction. And that brings me to a point connecting to ICVCM and BCMI. I think it's important for us to recognize, and I think this is a lot in this community have sort of misdiagnosed this, which is that carbon is an unusual asset class or an unusual commodity. In many respects, it's a public good, and we're using tools, market tools, and commodity tools, to drive efficiencies. You would never have like buyer criteria for a traditional commodity. So with ICVCM, we've got supply meta standard for supply, VCMI on demand. But I do think there's a missing middle here, which exposes us as a community to integrity issues, which is buyers, brokers, intermediaries, traders. And I do think if we look into the future that we'll see some, let's say, voluntary guidelines and standards like VCMI on that sort of missing middle that will have things like transparency, bans on excessive profiteering, ethical requirements for how those businesses operate, and things like that, and I think we'd welcome that.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of good comments here. I think that from our perspective, the ICVCM has really, we're hoping, and I think we believe that it will increase and enhance confidence and in the market. So we're really hoping that it has that effect. It was great to see the standards, submit their applications. And hopefully that will level the playing field a little bit, and maybe we'll get a few, some fewer bad headlines, because I think we could all use that. But I also think that all of this has driven investor behavior as well. You know, we're very, very thoughtful and careful, and we really, I think, investors more than ever, and I think we've always been pretty careful, but you know, we don't want to risk having any reputational damage, and we also don't want to create a product that can't be sold because buyers think it's bad quality. So, you know, it's really driven the way that we as an investor behave, and we're, you know, extremely thoughtful and careful about our investments, and we realize the importance of engaging with indigenous people, with the standards, with really understanding the safeguards requirements and implementing them well, and working with the governments to ensure that all of those safeguards are properly implemented and that there's good governance and so on. So it goes on and on and on. But I think that as an investor, we have become very, very careful and very, very thoughtful about how we invest and how we act with our projects. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, really enjoyed the discussion, so thanks to all of you for being on the panel. I had a little mental checklist in my head of your closing remarks of how much would I hear our practical considerations. So it was really nice to hear a lot about cooperation, continuous improvement, supporting a just transition, and yeah, just amazing to have all these sort of enablers of this market on the panel with me. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of you for joining as well. I think we'll leave it here. So thanks very much.